Hello, good afternoon. I know that it's been a marathon of activities, and I'm very grateful to be here with this. I know that now the team, the people are still outside, but I'm sure it will come more. So we're going to be talking about something that is touching every part of the world economy, and I'm very proud to have here two specialists and as well entrepreneurs that are leading the way in terms of how we can tokenize digital assets and enable better financial services and products, but as well how we can take this to government, to the economy. So I'm going to pass to the speakers because they have fantastic things, and then we're going to be talking. Of course, when you talk about digitalization of assets, it's a big task that is touching right now all the world economy, but governments still don't align efforts. There are some governments that are very advanced, like the Chinese government, other governments that are making a lot of research, but this touches everything, and the possibilities are enormous. And what we can look at this is, firstly, as we digitize the entire global economy, society, and identity of both us individuals, our products, our organizations, our buildings, our real estate, this is just the beginning, but at the same time, the possibilities are enormous to create a lot of new revenue streams and a lot of new possibilities for the world economy. So I want to pass the speech to our guests. So we have, I'll start with Jay Steinbeck, that is going to be talking about his project as well, iWhales. He's been working for a long time in digitalization of assets and as well a lot of products that are quite cutting edge and very important for what you're doing. And then Jana Pache, that is the Director of Policy for the Digital Pound Foundation, and is touching one of the most sensitive areas that is, of course, one of the biggest currencies in the world, and working as well in the policies, which is as well one area where there's a lot of still questions and remarks. So it's a pleasure to be here. I'll pass the word.
All right. I walk and talk if that's okay. So thank you guys for coming, and basically I want to walk through, there we go, talk a little bit about digital assets. A lot of you guys understand the concepts of tokenization, and really what I want to basically say is we haven't even scratched the surface on where this is going. So my name is Jay Steinbeck. I'm the CEO of a group called iWhales Enterprises. To date, just to give you an idea of where my education in this came from, I've interviewed over 1,000 CEOs, basically companies that are already up and running. They have fiduciary responsibilities. They're interested in blockchain and Web3 technologies, but they need to adhere to existing rules and regulations. I've recorded over 220 podcasts on the subject, basically reaching out to founders, entrepreneurs, developers that have been building in this space for some of them for the last decade plus, to really understand what did they build, why did they build it, what was their successes and failures. So pretty much what I did on that was to be able to be able to say, here's my education, and for anyone that wants to understand why I think this way or why we build things the way we do, we put that all on YouTube or Spotify or anything else, and so people can really see where we get these ideas from. We have also run a community. We have over 1,300 C-level executives from around the world. They tune in a couple times a week. We have a deep dive, basically where we learn about what we're doing, or what other people are doing, and then Fireside, which is kind of this week in everything Web3. So I want to start with, and we got a blank screen here for a second. So let's start with the concept of, everyone when they think of digital assets, they think of the JPEG monkeys. They think of, oh, somebody tokenized a car or a watch, and there's just like a token. I'm going to put a whole bunch of things on the screen here. And it's not to scare anybody, or I'm not going to talk through all these, but these are the concepts around tokenization that we all really need to start to be thinking of. This is an ecosystem. This is a platform. We are seeing the replacement of really the entire financial ecosystem, and being able to digitize these types of processes, these complicated financial instruments, is what tokenization is really about. So by the way, I'm not going to talk about digital money. That's what Jenna's going to talk about here. So we're going to talk about assets. We're going to talk about securities. We're going to talk about very highly regulated assets and how those can and should be put on the blockchain, if that's fair. So let's see. So this is a good slide. When we're talking about, hey, we can put a JPEG monkey on chain and we can prove that there's only one of them and we can do all these things, like we've proven the tech is solid. Now we need to say, how does this actually come into place? And we've seen people that have tokenized real estate. Generally, whenever I say, hey, we can do tokenization, people are like, real estate, go for it. This is actually probably the most accurate workflow that we've ever been able to find, and we had to build it, on what a residential home in the United States, all the processes, all the procedures, all the various touch points are to sell a home. So tokenizing like a location, you haven't even brought the rest of the players into to be able to certify and validate the product. So what you have is, and I see this constantly all the time, I have one of my other companies, I have a residential and real estate and commercial real estate brokerage, mortgage company, and title company. So I see the entire process. And so when people say tokenize real estate, what part of this? You know, you can create an SPV and you can tokenize that SPV, but it's not going to be recognized by the next party because it's not anything standardized. The government doesn't recognize it, they don't regulate it. And so one of the things that we've found time and time again is that you do need regulation. Regulations at its core is really designed around consumer protection and consumer understanding. Not saying that all regulation is perfect, and there's probably a few of you guys in the room that are extremely highly educated on this, but the entire goal is you understand the rules of the game. Blockchain allows us to very much streamline and simplify a lot of these very complex processes. And so I really want everyone to kind of think about how something as complex as this transaction, that right now the fastest you can go in the United States with a mortgage to close process is approximately 28 days. We've theorized and been able to work with a bunch of government regulators to bring this down to 3 days. That's a big change. And that means that you actually have true title on blockchain. So let's talk about the different type of assets. So when we talk about true tokenization, and any financial institution, any RIA investor or broker, you know, these are the ones that we really want to talk about. The concept of like, I'm tokenizing a watch or a small asset, that's fine. Let's talk about things that are securities. Let's talk about things that have amazing, big, real world changes and allow for exactly, I've heard so many people on the stage today talk about inclusion. It's hard to be included if you're in a part of the world that you don't have access to a stable financial ecosystem. The ability to do globalization, the ability to offer financial products anywhere in the world is only going to come through blockchain technologies and true tokenization. So when we look at this list, obviously real estate's right at the top. It's highly complex, it's highly regulated. There's estimated over $330 trillion worth of real estate that can be tokenized out there in the world. It's a big opportunity. Someone's gonna do it, we're gonna try like hell to make it happen. But you go down this list and you look at all these other aspects, and there's massive opportunities there. There's an estimated over $1.4 quadrillion of paper-based assets that can and should be moved to the blockchain over the next few decades. But there's a few concepts that have to change because we're still so early on there. So while I think that the concept of blockchain technology is sound, there's a few things that aren't. Wallets are garbage. I've looked at everything, I've talked to everyone. It's entirely just, it's not even ready to really be held there. So the idea of self-custody is key. But I like to think that if we're going to apply legal frameworks and regulation, you do need to have legal custodians. So having banks be inclusive of this really does help bridge that gap and provide the security that we all need. The other thing that I like to talk about is bridges are terrible. The concept of wrapping tokens from one chain to another doesn't work as well. So you need to be able to be chain agnostic. When someone goes onto a website, you don't look at it and say, oh my God, is this Amazon S3 or is this Azure? Because I only use S3 websites. It doesn't matter. Does the technology work? Is it sound? And how does it scale? The other part that I really like to talk about is what was the difference between Napster and Apple Music? They both use the exact same MP3 technology. However, Napster believed that peer-to-peer was fine. They could scale, and for a minute they were. For a minute, they absolutely had the world at their beck and call, and everyone thought that the future was just going to be Napster and LimeWire and things being traded around. And then Apple Music and others showed up and created a legal foundation, legally acquired rights to those musics, paid the royalty holders appropriately, and you can see who's become a major player in the industry. That's the way we see things moving. So we're going to take the last item on that list, which is carbon credits. we're going to say, I'm not going to start with the biggest and hardest opportunity. We're going to start with an unregulated asset. We're going to force regulation in, and this is what we're working on here with FinRamp. So how does a carbon credit work? Super simplistic model, but I can talk through it in 3 seconds. I've done something bad. I'd like to do something good to offset that. By the way, every Fortune 1000 company, Fortune 500 company has mandates to use carbon credits to offset their carbon exposure. So I'd like to purchase carbon credits to make that happen, and you can choose, there's solar, there's wind, there's methane recapture, there's all sorts of these kind of things. The problem is it's not regulated. And again, it's great to think that we can all be decentralized and we can be happy and can work, but it doesn't. And this is an old article, it's been debunked a number of times, but the reality is this is public perception. There's another article that just came out in the Wall Street Journal about two weeks ago, and it's the exact same thing. Because it's fragmented, you're seeing double, triple retirement of carbon credits, and that entirely defeats the purpose. You're also seeing that brokers are taking 70 to 80% of the profits of these, instead of going to the offsetters, they're actually trying to help the world. So the thing that every Fortune 1000 company and 500 company is mandated to use to try to solve the problem of carbon is entirely broken. So what we've done is we've decided we want to fix this. So we're going to tackle this through one of our FinRamp projects. And really quickly, we built a vertically integrated solution that mirrors where we would need to go into that residential home market eventually as our kind of North Star. And it's an entirely vertically integrated solution. So we can bring carbon credits on if they already exist. We can also fund new projects through a bond prospectus structure. We utilize legal custodians. So if you come into our platform, you're able to use a bank or another financial institution or a broker to hold your assets. And then lastly, you want to be able to trade these. Liquidity is the key. If you don't have liquidity, and I know people have tokenized billions of dollars of real estate, and it sits there because there's no liquidity, so the entire projects fail. So we're attaching ours, this is an EU-based company, we'll be attaching to MTFs. I'm actually here in London, not just to hang out and talk to you guys, but working on integration to FCAs. So you can actually bring the big traders in and be able to trade these on the regulated assets and provide the security of the people that are buying them. And eventually this leads into actually authenticated retirement, showcasing that, hey, IJ Steinbeck purchased these carbon credits, here's the way it works. You can see I retired 100 tons this year, X amount of percent in methane recapture, X amount of percent in rainforestry, and be able to trace those sources all the way back. So you actually can validate and verify that United Airlines did retire that much carbon, and here's the good that they actually did in the world. Again, there's over 1,300 of us around the world, so you can understand kind of where we get our theses, because again, we have to be inclusive of everyone, not just, I'm from the United States clearly, but we're not even touching the United States right now because regulations aren't ready to go. MiFID 2 is great, MiCA is coming, so we're focused heavily on the EU. We'd like to have our secondary operation be here in the UK. And then, like I said, lastly, we're Y Whales that I run. We're focused on a lot of things. We do education, we do podcasts. We have a venture capital arm. We have an immersive commerce platform, solutions group, all sorts of stuff. So just so you guys understand, the theses we get is from a lot of work every single day, 60, 70 hours a week across so many verticals. If any of you guys are interested in the FinRamp project of what we're doing or building, please scan, take a look. There's the full 10-minute pitch. And I will turn it over to Jenna to talk about the next topic, and then we'll get to a few questions after that.
Sure. I'm not going to use slides, but you can go to.
You want the one with all the stuff?
Oh, yeah, okay.
There you go. Look, we made one slide for her.
I didn't really want a slide, but Jay's very into slides, so he said, "Send me some stats, I'll make you a slide." So this is a slide, basically. I wouldn't read too much into that slide. So my name's Jenna Pache, and I wear a number of hats. First of all, I'm the founder of a consultancy called Markets Evolution, which specializes in regulatory strategy and financial innovation. And secondly, I am also a member of the originating team behind the Digital Pound Foundation, and currently an executive director and policy lead for the Digital Pound Foundation. So the Digital Pound Foundation is a membership-led, not-for-profit organization that advocates for the introduction of what we call a well-designed digital pound in both public and private forms in the UK, and for a diverse, effective, and competitive ecosystem for new forms of digital money in the UK and globally. And hopefully by the end of my 10 minutes, you'll understand a little bit about what that means. So Jay has painted this glorious vision of digital assets and what can be achieved with blockchain and how we can use smart contracts to govern transactions and improve settlement efficiencies and all of this great stuff. But there's an important missing piece here, which is the settlement leg. So going back to the origins of the internet, what's often referred to as the internet's original sin is the absence of internet native payments, basically. So we had data on the internet, we had commerce on the internet, we did not have payments on the internet. So if you go on Amazon today and you buy something, your transaction takes place on Amazon, but the payments leg will take place outside. You don't have atomic settlement, so buyers and sellers are exposed to settlement risk to each other. And in financial markets, this is obviously a much bigger problem. So at the moment, in traditional financial markets, we're used to having delayed settlement. But in the world of digital assets, we have the potential for atomic settlement. But that doesn't work if your payment or settlement leg is happening off-ledger, off-chain. If your asset leg can basically happen on-chain and instantaneously, but you've still got delayed settlement off-chain. So new forms of digital money are kind of the solution to this. So cryptocurrency markets at the moment. If you want to trade cryptocurrencies, or if you want to trade security tokens. I'm also interested in the fact that my name is spelled differently on pretty much every slide. So it's J-A-N-N-A-H, by the way.
I can be blamed.
It's correct in the agenda, don't worry, it was the first slide as well, not yours. So what the solution that cryptocurrency markets came up with was basically the creation of stablecoins. So some of you may have heard of Tether USDT or Circle's USDC, which are often used for settlement and kind of intermediate holding of currency on chain. And that's typically in US dollars. And these stablecoins are currently unregulated on the most part, and they are issued by private companies with varying degrees of scrutiny over how they're backed and the reserve assets behind them, but they're designed to mimic the value of a currency, in most cases at the moment the dollar. Now, if I'm a bank and I want to engage in a digital bond transaction, for example, I don't want to use Bitcoin to settle that on chain because Bitcoin is highly volatile. And while I think the only people who would be on board with that are really your Bitcoin maximalists, and I don't imagine there are many in this room right now. I don't want to use USDT or USDC either because they're unregulated. I don't have necessarily trust and confidence in their issuers. And I'm a systemically important financial institution. I want to use something with no counterparty risk or one that is highly regulated and has minimal counterparty risk. So this is where tokenized money or new forms of digital money come in. And here, again, we're not talking about cryptocurrency. We're talking about digital native forms of money. And many of you will say at this point in time, but isn't all the money we use pretty much digital native anyway? After all, when we transact with each other day to day, we're mostly using our phones or we're using cards. Wheelbarrows of cash are not being exchanged between banks at the end of the day. Most of us are not using cash in our day-to-day transactions anymore. But the entire financial system still has an underlying assumption, pretty much, that wheelbarrows of cash are being exchanged at the end of the day. The processes, the kind of technology has grown and evolved organically over decades and in some cases centuries. And what we have, so there's all sorts of inefficiencies, legacy inefficiencies that exist in our current monetary system and our financial system. And what new forms of digital money give us the opportunity to do is to start from scratch, to say, what are the requirements that we have today of money for payments and settlement purposes, and what does a digital economy, what does the metaverse, what does the future, what do frontiers technologies give us the ability to do, how can we support them with money? And secondly, what does the technology that we have enable us to create in terms of money and payments mechanisms? And that is what we have the opportunity to do now. So when we talk about new forms of digital money, we're talking about digital native implementations of money. And these can include functionality and features that are not possible with existing money. So again, we can have types of money that are programmable themselves or can be governed by smart contracts. And again, this can be all integrated into an ecosystem of digital assets and fully digital financial markets, and enable the realization of Jay's dream of a tokenized future. So in terms of new forms of digital money, we have two main types, and they're broadly reflective of the types of money that we have today. So today we have public money, which is publicly issued and represents liability against a central bank. This is typically in the form of wholesale reserves held at a central bank, which most of us don't have access to, but the banking system does, or cash. And we have privately issued money, which is commercial bank money. And that is in the form of deposits in commercial banks. And again, a really important distinction here is, when you put money into a bank account, you no longer have a claim. You no longer have, $100 or whatever, or £100 or whatever you think you deposited. You have a liability or a claim against that commercial bank. And so that is private money. It's a liability against a private issuer, whereas public money is a liability or a claim against a central bank. And so in the future of new forms of digital money, we expect to see this kind of dichotomy reproduced. So on the private issuance side, we see regulated stablecoins coming down the pipeline. So many jurisdictions, including the UK, have proposals around at the moment for stablecoin regulation. We expect to see tokenized deposits or tokenized commercial bank money, and we expect to see other forms like tokenized e-money as well. And on the public side, we have central bank digital currencies. So many jurisdictions have been consulting on, or are in the process of building, or in China have pretty much gone live with, because once you have a pilot at that scale, it is pretty much just live. So they're looking at central bank digital currencies. And again, these are digital native forms of public money. And the kind of features and functionality that these public and privately issued forms of digital money may exhibit may differ as well. So, some types of privately issued money may compete in different functionality, whereas public money may be more of a utility in the future. It's a whole huge area. We've written lots about it at the Digital Pound Foundation, and we have a bunch of podcasts and videos and things like that as well. So digitalpoundfoundation.com if anyone is interested in that. I think I was supposed to touch on why central bank digital currencies, because this is a very important point as well. And it's often said, I think the private sector will often say, we've got this, especially the banking system. The American Bankers Association in 2020 wrote a letter to the Federal Reserve, which pretty much said, you don't need to do anything, we've got this. We will, tokenize deposits, we will issue regulated stablecoins, you don't need a central bank digital currency. In the UK, it has often been asked as well, why does the UK need a CBDC? Are we only doing this because China is doing it, for example? And from my perspective, from a policy perspective, again, in the DPF, we have lots of people looking at use cases and applications and the future of payments and things like that. I'm very grateful that they exist. It's not my particular area of interest. I'm interested in the policy perspective and in the kind of bigger geopolitical context. And we should be looking at it, or every jurisdiction should be looking at CBDC because China is looking at it, because we should be looking ahead to what China will be able to do with its currency on the global stage, the kind of soft power that it will be able to exert through its currency, through the functionality and the constraints attached to it in 5 or 10 years' time that we will not be able to have with our own currencies unless we explore the potential of CBDC as well. And I think I'm going to leave it there.
Look at this. We're right on the dot.
So thank you all for these great insights here. So there's a lot of things that were talked here, especially when it talks to tokenization. First of all, it's a non-consensual subject, like you are an expert in policies, and this is a big problem because we have multi-velocities. And for instance, you touched one important thing. So the world economy is around $80 trillion. And from this 80 trillion, sometimes it goes to 100 trillion, depends on the sources. There's 300 trillion of capital, real estate assets, but there's $700 trillion of securities and trading. So at the moment and this is my first question for you, Jay, it's a big one, but I think it's important because we're touching all of this right now, and the present economy is that, so we have like multiple velocities. So there's the geopolitics, there's the conventional, traditional assets, let's put it that way, which at the same time, for instance, you didn't mention that, but most of the stock exchanges around the world are already using blockchain for most of the operations. The challenge is how we pass the use of technology to the use of digital assets, which is two different things. So my question for you is, within this fragmentation, and as well the velocity, there's a lot of innovation in a lot of areas, but most of the governments are completely lost. And at the same time, the traders, especially in crypto, is around, right now, $2 trillion, which is not tiny compared, for instance, there's every day there's $4 trillion being traded in Forex assets. So the challenge is, and that's my question is, how can companies like yours and organizations work with, well, first of all, create solid business models, but work with regulators and governments to create good products that can solve our problems? Because it's the first question that we have to answer.
Yeah, why not start with a small one? I think that we need to really start with the technology is still relatively early. You know, we're very early in the cycle, and if you go back to Web 1, and I think that, you know, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it rhymes. And if you think back to early Web 1, before we had Netscape, before we had a real browser, nobody quite knew what this thing was. There was a lot of people that had ideas, there was a lot of concepts were coming into play, but suddenly there was like this visualization layer. And we have not hit that yet. That's what, you know, when I'm kind of ragging on, you know, wallets and bridges and some of these other things, we're really missing that, like, going from, you know, an AM radio to like a 4K, you know, TV. And that's what you're going to see with blockchain here as it starts to integrate more and more with AI. And I'll say this from this perspective, blockchain is not really designed for humans. It is designed for AI. So how do we take, you know, those concepts and then integrate government in there? I think that it does take regulation. It does take, you have to all be able to play by the same rules of the game. Let's go back to the real estate thing. You can't have every single broker and every single state using different formats and different titles and everything else. Otherwise, no matter how smart AI is, it's just not going to understand where things are. So we kind of have a little bit of computer science, you know, formatting and elaboration of the rules over the regulations. And then you have a lot of just, we're missing the kind of a piece of this. We're missing the ability to create, you know, highly complex financial instruments on top of this technology that go beyond just, here's a token, here's a liquidity pool, here's a thing. And the concept of decentralization, I relate to, you know, a little bit of Napster. You know, it's going to be cool for a minute, but at some point someone's going to create a fully vertically integrated solution that just works, and it brings the entire web forward. And at that point, the governments will just be along for the ride.
So this is kind of probably the biggest challenge we're facing as a civilization, because we have to look at, especially spatial computing becoming much more advanced.
Very much.
Definitely the assets will be much more virtual, and we live in a bridge between physical and digital. We are already living. There was actually a couple of sessions before that were touching that. So, Jana, one of the questions I have, and at the moment there's two questions. Are we going to centralize and ultra centralize like China did? Because China used blockchain to centralize the entire economy, and it's working in their own way. Or then we can mix an hybrid model with decentralization. But for instance, you are with talking as well the Central Bank of the UK, and the pound is probably the fourth or fifth forex exchange in the world. How do you see these kind of movements between centralized, highly centralized, decentralized, and a bit the chaos in the middle?
So I think there's a number of levels in which I could answer that question, and I think in every jurisdiction has different drivers and motivations for introducing a central bank digital currency. China's in particular was very interesting because it was actually a reaction to the increasing power of privately owned big kind of tech fins like Alibaba and WePay, which you know, were responsible for a lot of the day-to-day transacting of the Chinese population, and so the government wanted to take back some of that, a lot of those transactions, and take back the power associated with being, you know, the main payments infrastructure and stuff like that. I think in the UK, the motivations are quite different, and one of the key motivations is around wanting to create a platform for innovation and to retain the UK's position as a global leader in fintech and financial services on the global stage. And this is very much viewed by the Bank of England as a public-private partnership, so involving the private sector in the market structure around any proposed central bank digital currency, as well as seeing a future in which privately issued forms of new forms of digital money coexist with a central bank digital currency as well. So the Bank of England says, it sees the UK as existing on a spectrum of public to private, cryptocurrencies being on a different spectrum altogether. So again, that's not the scope of this conversation. And so they will coexist. And so the question for an organization like the Digital Pound Foundation is, how do we make sure that we advocate for a future ecosystem that is diverse and effective and competitive, and that does give rise to the delivery of economic and social benefits through that ecosystem of different types of digital money? Which I guess from that point of view is not necessarily a centralized system. It is a kind of federated system of money in the same way that the money we have today is, but it's underpinned by solid regulatory and legal fundamentals.
So you touch a very important thing, is the sustainability of the models. And right now we have the sustainability of tech. You mentioned carbon credits, which is a big thing because, of course, climate change together with AI is probably the biggest challenge we're facing. So from your experience building multiple companies and working with regulators and as well a lot of innovation, so you're touching in the Web3 that we call Web3, whatever we call it in different ways. So can we use the digital assets to create, which is partly what happened with the ICOs. The idea was kind of create a new model of stock markets, but it failed in a lot of ways because of the greediness and a lot of things we know. But is it possible to make the bridge and create a sustainable, first of all, product that actually solve the problems of the economy and solve the problems of society using the digital assets with platforms like yours? I would like to touch that from your entrepreneur side.
100%. And in the quick 10 seconds of the way to describe what we're building is, the reason that the NASDAQ exists is because nobody wanted to list these crappy little tech stocks. It was too expensive, it was paper, and I think we heard the speech earlier today, you had to run around and wave your piece of paper. And then for the NASDAQ, they said, well, we've got this new technology, computers, we'll list it on there, so if you want to buy and interact with these, you're just going to have to interact with the computer instead of waving pieces of paper. Obviously, you know where that's kind of gone and changed since there. We look at this, we've identified $1 quadrillion worth of assets, and that's that next phase of blockchain, of integration. So you have to have the ability to legally tokenize. So we have to be able to legally bring these things on there and have governments regulate it and make sure that it's free and fair and whatever amount of decentralization or regulation is needed. But then you also have to have liquidity. You have to have people be able to buy, sell, and trade these things. And the problem you have is right now, no one can accept, hey, my company's got, $100 million of assets, and Susie from, accounting hit the wrong button and they're all gone. Like, that's never going to scale. That's never going to work. None of us are going to accept that. So you have to have the ability to have these almost trade as derivatives and have centralized authorities that you can make them insurable products. You can make them scalable. That's when I think we're going to see this thing kind of really take off, is when it is better, faster, and cheaper to utilize blockchain than it is to use the traditional rails.
And I think I agree. That's the challenge that we all face. So last one for you, Jana. So one of the questions is really the lack of uniformity or any actually at the moment alignment with policymakers and regulators. So you are working with them, you are an expert on that. What would be the best way at least to create some kind of consensus? Because the challenge that we have US in one extreme, Asia in another extreme, and then we have China, and we have Middle East as well is becoming a powerhouse at the moment, is leading the world economy in a lot of ways, and then emerging markets. So from your experience dealing with, first of all, a lot of lawmakers, a lot of experts, what do you think is the best approach we should look to make this possible, and as well a bit more balanced, because it's right now is going in a very wrong way in a lot of ways?
Well, I think, again, there are two dimensions to that question. There's, first of all, in terms of private issuances, such as, when we're looking at stablecoin regulation, how do we ensure that these things, which are probably going to be used on a global level, are treated consistently by regulators globally? And that is an eternal challenge, I think. Yes, we have IOSCO principles, and, yes, we have various sort of, multilateral agreements and principles like that. But as we've seen, with post-global financial crisis regulation, you can set principles at the G20 level, but when they're actually implemented by different jurisdictions, the outcomes are very different from what was intended. So that's a perennial challenge, and I don't think we're going to solve that in the 0 seconds I have left. On the CBDC side, I think that is a very interesting question. Now, people often talk about CBDCs as being fairly useless unless they're interoperable, but money today is not actually interoperable, so the money of different jurisdictions is not interoperable. That's why we have latencies in cross-border settlement. That's why we have correspondent banking networks. We have these complex workarounds and delayed settlement because money is not interoperable. And so the potential for creating technical means of interoperability between national digital currencies is greater than the potential today, and for reducing some of those inefficiencies. I think the key challenge there is still going to be around how we get sufficient cooperation on that multilateral scale in order to create some of those interoperability frameworks and standards.
So I think we're running out of time, but this, as you know, is a big topic. So I think all of us should act on this because this is touching us all. So as we speak, there's billions of dollars of transactions in crypto, there's in CBDCs, there's in digital assets as well, but there's a completely broken, fragmented ecosystem. So I want to thank you both because that's excellent work on building something that works. And thank you for being here. And I don't know, Eric, if you have time for one question at least. It's up to you.
I'm Royce. So I'd like to ask, what is the biggest challenge for using crypto online, like e-commerce? What is the biggest challenge?
So you mean why wouldn't I want to use crypto as a means of payment? Because of its volatility. So if I'm, there's the story of, everyone knows, there is this famous story of, the first pizza that was ever paid for was Bitcoin. Now, I have a friend who actually did pay for a pizza with Bitcoin about 9 years ago, and she is like ruining the day she ever used it. Cryptocurrency is just too volatile. It's not a good store of value, and for that purpose, it's not a good medium of exchange. You want something that is stable in value if you're going to pay for something. You don't want to use, what is essentially a speculative asset to do that.
We're getting kicked off.
Yeah.
I'm happy to meet anyone in the lobby and chat about this further.
You're not getting kicked off. I'm going to ask you one more question.
Okay.
Oh, look at this.
If I may, I love all three of you, so I'm slightly biased. But Jay, if you've solved some of the biggest user experience problems of tokenization,
Correct.
How big is the potential? What does that look like?
It's the revolution of the internet all over again. Web 1 was read, Web 2 was read write, and Web 3 is read write own. So it's truly, we think about when eBay showed up and suddenly people from home suddenly had businesses they could create. It dynamically changed marketplaces. E-commerce has changed the world. When you think about the things Jen and I are talking about, suddenly the world gets very, very small. Suddenly you can transact, you can do business with anywhere in the world. You can have supply chains that are backed up, insured. Things move much faster and much smoother. So it is a very, very different world once somebody solves this. The same as if we went back to the mid 90s and someone said, hey, would you want to buy a car online? They'd look at you like you're crazy. But we do it all day.
One of the reasons that we asked Janet to join us is that we want the smartest people in the room helping us solve the problem. So, is that possible, Jenna?
Is what possible, Eric? Anything is possible. I actually want to go back and say something. I want to clarify something because I think people don't make a big enough deal of this very simple, fundamental statement, which is, so if you think about Napster, for example, if you think about the internet, we had the ability to create and share files. You can copy files. There's no uniqueness of ownership, and there's no full transferability of ownership either. I can sell something to you, and I can sell a copy of it to someone else, and you just own a copy of that thing. What blockchain and DLT give us the ability to do is to have full ownership rights attached to something, to a unique object, and to have full transferability of ownership of that object. When I sell something, or when I sell an NFT, I am the ownership of that is transferring to another person. It's not me making a copy of it. And that is really the kind of big Web3 step forward from the internet. It is that ownership, as Jay said. But I just wanted to make that clear for everyone, that that's the key innovation, yeah.
It's a world we all want to live in. Thank you all very much.
Okay.
So we're back in here at 4:10. It's coffee time.